Someone check if hell just froze over because Adrian Orr, the man who's been steering New Zealand's financial ship through stormy seas, has suddenly jumped overboard. Backed by popular demand, with the no-nonsense Maurice Williamson, who spent 30 years in Parliament, holding 9 cabinet posts, working under 4 Prime Ministers. In that time, there were 3 Reserve Bank governors, including Don Brash. What does today's news mean for your pathway of financial freedom? Find out next.
Financial freedom faster. Financial freedom faster.
If you like making money rather than watching everyone else do it, hit that subscribe button and get ahead, because this is New Zealand's fastest growing real estate and investment show. Fresh after his headlines regarding Luxon and Trump, the no-nonsense former Minister of Building, Construction and Local Government is back. Maurice, where do we start?
I have to say that Adrian Orr should have gone a long time ago. He's made appalling decisions, both with regards to when to put the tightening into the economies and when to put the easing back in. To have put 50 billion of liquidity into a market just meant that we just were going to always, it's a little bit like getting drunk at a party, knowing the headache the next morning, the harder you drink, the worse it's going to be. He made the economy so damaged, in my view, really damaged, and that damage deep into the bone of the body corporate, that you're still seeing the impacts of that appalling lack of decisions in the both directions he took it, and the whole liquidity that he flooded the market with. And I think that it's going to be some years before things like the construction sector ever recover fully from appalling decisions. So I don't like dancing on the grave of someone who's gone. You often just say, well, that's good, he's gone, and let's move on. But I think Adrian Orr will go down in the books as the person who made some of the worst possible decisions, and in my view was the worst Reserve Bank governor. And I put that as a comparator to somebody like Don Brash, who I worked with as a minister and got briefed by. And I thought the guy just literally had his hand on the tiller the whole time, knowing what needed to be done and when it needed to be done and so on. And the legacy of him will be deep pain within the body corporate for some time to come.
Yes, and I guess that when Don Brash was the Reserve Governor, the RBNZ had that sole remit, focusing on a few specific things, made the job a bit easier. Is that what we need to go back to? And
yeah, I mean, I think in the end, price stability is the only focus, the Reserve Bank. So they do that through money supply and what they call quantitative easing and printing and so on. But all in the end, it's to try to keep pricing stability into the market. Now, you've got imported inflation that will drive you, and you can't do much about it. You know, you've got a fuel crisis coming out of the Ukraine, and that will drive up fuel where you're trying to hold that within your bandwidth. But in the end, there was a lot that we did domestically that was not needed, that was over the top. The Labour government threw money around like it was a one-arm paper hanger or a drunken sailor, I think is the analysis some people use. Got nothing out of it in terms of any beneficial, but they locked us down for way too much. I know this is not the Reserve Bank, but I want to give you this one quip. I came back from being Consul General in the States and had to go into lockdown for 2 weeks. I tested in LA, I had no COVID. I tested at Auckland Airport, I had no COVID. And they put me into a hotel here for 2 weeks. I had no COVID. Out on the streets of Auckland at that time, 20 to 25,000 people had tested positive. So I was pleased they kept me in a hotel and away from me. So you imagine how poor that decision-making was, and you combine that with chucking 50 billion, 50 billion, that's $50,000 million into the economy. It caused huge damage.
a reminder, if you missed out on cheap houses in the 90s, don't miss out on the best property investing advice in New Zealand. Subscribe now and make up for lost time. Maurice, new Reserve Bank governor, is going to come in. Don Brash was a great governor.
Fantastic. Yeah, there have been others that have been good. I have to say I've worked with 2 or 3 others along the way that I thought were really good. I thought Don Brash was a standout, and he chose to leave because he wanted to go into the political world, and he stood for the National Party in 2002 and then became leader at about 2005 and so on. Came within a breath of fresh air of actually becoming Prime Minister in the 2005 election.
So what makes a good Reserve Bank governor?
I think it's a feel. I think it's more than anything. You've got all these formulas and you've got all these dashboard screens, and you can watch what's going up and what's going down. And if you push that 0.5%, what is the coefficient of elasticity with regards to that bit and so on. But that's still the science and the mathematics, which you have to know. But there's also a feeling, like a good musician who can feel the music that they're playing, and you feel their soul in it rather than they just played the notes and you heard dong dong. And Brash had a feel for what worked and what didn't. He had a feel for the impacts that it had. He understood that down the passage several ways. These are knock-on effects that keep bang, bang, bang. So you might only make a change to this stuff, and way down the bottom end, some poor builder's gone out of business because of those decisions you've taken. My understanding when he ever briefed us is he felt that, and he knew how it worked, and he knew all of the sort of moving parts to a very complicated jigsaw.
Yes, well, we try in New Zealand to separate the church and state, so to speak, and having the Reserve Bank separated from government. And you see today, Luxon and Willis, they don't really directly want to comment. But the government has been controlling the Reserve Bank in some ways by giving them more money.
And we appoint the boards and we appoint the Reserve Bank governor. So I think there is some element of culpability.
It's a political position, essentially.
Except all I can tell you is that I've been on a selection panel at our Auckland Council selecting people to go on the boards of Auckland Transport and on the board of Watercare, which is one of the biggest companies in the country in terms of infrastructure. And once the person's there, you go, oh, wow, what did we do that for? Because they almost have a life unto themselves. So everyone says, well, you must have control over it, but you don't. Once they're there, they take on a life of their own, the Reserve Bank governor. And if they're good at it, and as I said, it's a skill set that very few have. It's not like you can go out and just pick another Reserve Bank governor from the banking sector. It's a really specific set of skills. If they do the job well, they're worth everything that you pay them and more. If they do the job poorly, there's got to be another mechanism that somehow slams the brakes on and has a way of them being, recalled, or whatever you'd use the word, so that someone else can take over.
Yeah, well, I saw that Adrian Orr made over $800,000 in his income last year in that position, and one would imagine that sort of package is going to be available for whoever comes in.
Well, 800,000's a small pay for someone who really does the job well, because they can affect billions in the economy and tens of thousands of jobs and a whole lot of exports and so on. So I don't mind paying.
So what do they do at the Reserve Bank? Let's start there.
Well, it's all to do with sort of controlling monetary supply and putting all sorts of regulations on how much liquidity can come into the market. Because you could go down there now and print a whole lot of money and just put it out into circulation. Now, it's got nothing to back it. Made one more can of beans to back it. So what's its value? Its value is what was the economy before, diluted by that much. You just dilute the value of you could end up being like Argentina, who had inflation at 200%. And literally, I worked for Aerolíneas Argentinas in Buenos Aires, and they would take US dollars at about 3 times the trading rate that you could normally get, because they could put it under their mattress and keep the value of it in US dollar. The Argentinian peso, or the Austral, they went to a new currency, just every day devalued by sort of 10, 15, 20%. In a week, it was half of what it was. That's the damage, that if you don't control those things, your inflation explodes on you. And I'm really delighted that we've got a Reserve Bank Act, and I'm really delighted that there is a specific set of targets, 1 to 3. You can argue it should have been 0 to 2, or it may be 2 to 4 or whatever, but they're targets and they've got to try and stay within that band. If they do that job well, it creates an environment for the government to get on with the things it wants without distorting all sorts of investment markets, all sorts of value chains out there in the economy.
So if we look ahead as to the future, new governor's going to come in. Now, the government's going to decide on candidates, I'm guessing, or candidates will get presented. How does this selection process go? And is this an opportunity to say, well, there used to be 200 staff, now there's 650 staff.
Yep.
Are they focusing on too many things?
Well, that's the first question. You always have to ask any organisation that has gone catastrophically up in staff numbers, but I see their total budget from 2018, which was 32 million to run it, is now at 80 million and probably beyond. And actually that 80 million is from 2023, so 2024 was probably even higher. So the first question you'd have to say is, do you need that sum of money? What would you do? What are the things that the Reserve Bank's been doing that you think need to stay because they're core role and function? And what is all the dross that surrounds it that you would want? If I was doing the interviews, I'd want a whole series of questions about what are your key performance indicators? What would mark success for you? What does success look like? Because that's a really important question to ask these people.
Inflation 2%.
Yeah, okay. Now, how can you assure me that you know which of all those many levers and switches we were talking about earlier, that you know how to move them right to stay stable, and when it's coming offline, bring it back into line quickly, and that you won't let it explode in one direction and then have to take catastrophic action the other way, and in both directions you get hurt. Yep. The public gets hurt. And so I think I think the ministers involved will do a real deep dive into the person that's wanting to be the Reserve Bank governor, and they need to come up with someone who gives them that confidence that they understand that every little thing they do. I mean, Don Brash said to me one day, you had to be so careful even how you put the commas or a stop in your sentencing, because the journalist would say he was a bit hesitant when he was... Now, you might have actually had an itchy nose and you stopped for a minute. He was a bit concerned about that, and they'd write it up, and next thing the markets would all move one. So it's a really difficult job, and the right person doing it is worth every bit of whatever their salary is. I don't care if it's $1 million, they're worth it.
A reminder, if you missed out on cheap houses in the 90s, don't miss out on the best property investing advice in New Zealand. Subscribe now and make up for lost time. Maurice, so what are the levers available for the Reserve Bank?
Well, the very first lever that's logical to every one of your listeners is the official cash rate. That's the big lever in the middle. And if they set that to a specific point, that's what the banks are paying for their interbank charges of money moving between banks and so on, and they always have to make a profit on top of that. And in my view, I think an excess profit for New Zealand. I think the more we could get some competition in the banking sector, we would see less profits. But in the end, that's the biggie, setting what that official cash rate is. But there are lots of other things that he can play with that changes what liquidity, how much quantitative easing he does, how much liquidity he pumps into the marketplace, how quickly they do it, whether it's done over a very gradual and sort of seeps into the economy and makes a small difference that's beneficial, or whether you flood the economy and so on. So they're complicated. We'd get the graph out each day and see whether we're moving this way or that. So I think in the end for most people, it's that official cash rate. And we all are waiting for the next announcement and every news item. And everyone's an expert on it now. I can have to tell you, when OCR first started, I didn't know anyone that knew what it was. Now everyone's waiting. It's on the 15th of April or something. We're going to see another. And will it be 25 basis points? Most people didn't know what basis points even meant. And now they all do. So it's good that people know, and it's good that they're following it. But they also have to understand that it's only a headline item, and the damage that flows from that being wrong is more severe than anyone will ever know, and for longer than anyone will ever realise.
So do you think any candidates have been looked at?
I don't know. I don't know if there's been any chat behind the scenes that there's grumpiness or why he's going, and whether he was pushed or whether he's decided on he's not prepared to take any more of the criticism. I don't know the reason. I would doubt there's anybody been interviewed or considered, because it soon gets out. The thing about New Zealand is it's so small that no matter what you do, but one of the great comedians in America once said that two people can keep a secret as long as one of them is dead.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. You'd start doing some work behind the scenes. Someone in the bureaucracy will leak it to their wife who told somebody at the hairdresser, and I've heard no mumblings of anybody being looked at or talked about or whatever. And we reappointed the guy, and I couldn't believe that in my own. I sat there going, National Party, what are you doing?
Well, correct me if I'm wrong, but he was reappointed for 5 years under Grant Robinson.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so, I mean, that was a political kind of move, don't you think?
Well, you don't want it to be political, because his job should be completely irrelevant of who the political masters are. Their job is to get on and do things.
But the Reserve Bank is a political football now with all the
Correct.
climate change, Maori initiatives and the spread.
But every one of those things is just irrelevant to what the role and function should be.
So the
Climate change should be left to the government with climate ministers. This idea that banks are now refusing to lend to companies who haven't got a good climate policy is insanity. It is truly, and banks should be embarrassed that they've even said such a thing.
Well, Kiwi Bank even today was announcing a lot of LGBTQ type initiatives that they're focusing on at the moment, and
again, irrelevant.
Yeah.
They should be having a policy of anybody who's got merit for an application, we'll fund it and we'll help fund it and so on. And anybody who doesn't cross the line of merit, we won't, rather than any other factor. My lovely line, and I think it's a brilliant line from a guy in Britain recently. He was debating at Oxford University, and he was talking about Britain, but we can transfer it to New Zealand in a minute. He said, if Britain was to sink into the ocean tomorrow and be gone, completely gone, disappeared altogether, it would make not one jot of difference to climate change. The place where it's going to be driven from is out of Asia and Latin America, where there's huge growth in all sorts of economies and all sorts of emissions into the air. Well, they're about 2.5% of total emissions in the UK, and they would make no difference at all. We're 0.17% of the global emissions.
Yeah.
If New Zealand was to completely go tomorrow, now you've got people like the Greens and some of the Labour Party people who think we've got to get rid of agriculture and we've got to get rid of a whole lot of industries and we've got to stop mining. As I said, it would make not one jot of difference. And the Greens said at the last election, if we got elected, we would be able to stop climate change. It would make no difference whatsoever. So the Reserve Bank should stay right out of what's not part of its remit and go focusing purely on how do they keep that price stability and how do they make the banking sector more conducive to investing where it matters and you get a rate of return and what's value for money and not any other factors, whether it has green wallpaper or purple curtains, is irrelevant.
Thanks for joining us, Maurice. We'll talk about it as it unfolds. Cheers.
My pleasure.
You probably don't know, Maurice is right at the centre at Auckland Council, bringing about over 300 million of cuts in the last few years. You do not want to miss the episodes coming out soon. We're the fastest growing property investment and investment advice show in New Zealand. Hit subscribe and you'll find out soon.
More cash, passive income coming fast. Make your money work for you. Live the dream, it's overdue. So don't just wait, take control. Mortgage HQ will make you bold. Financial freedom's in your hands. Take that step, it's time to